I've been waiting for a very long time for the events that are adapted into this week's episode of Bleach. Instead of continuing with the battle between Mayuri and Pernida, we cut to SHUNSUI'S major battle during the 1000-Year Blood War arc as he faces off against Lil Barrow, the first Quincy which Yhwach had bestowed a shrift to. Episode 35 was another perfectly paced installment of Bleach, which remains very faithful to the original manga. Content from the midpoint of chapter 644 all the way up until slightly before the end of chapter 649 is adapted here. In total, there is just under 5 chapters worth of material adapted into this latest episode, as we have little to no anime original content here, as we begin with a recap of the last episode, with Mayuri laughing uncontrollably after his Bankai devours Pernida, as we then cut to Shunsui confronting Lil and the other Shinigami continuing onward towards Varvelt. The first half of episode 35 focuses on Shunsui using his Shikai against Lil, forcing him to open both of his eyes up to 3 times, as he then activates his holy form Divine Judgment. The second half of the episode we see a bit of Ichigo speaking with Askin, and the highlight of the episode is the long-awaited reveal of Shunsui's Bankai Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju. Similar to last week, there is more restructuring of the manga content here, as the manga has a tendency to focus on one fight until its conclusion, but the anime is switching the order out, as instead we are being shown the first half of Mayuri's fight and then we cut to the first half of Shunsui's fight in this episode. This has been done in order for us to appreciate that these fights are happening at the same time as each other. So without further delay, let's dive into my review and analysis of Bleach 1000-Year Blood War episode 35, Don't Chase a Shadow. We got really tired of the same old boring anime shirts, so we decided to launch Getsuga.com with the aim of creating designs inspired by our favorite anime and manga. We came up with designs that look cool and represent all of our favorite stories. Check out the latest Instinct collection, which features some amazing designs like this Frosted Heavens design inspired by Toshiro Hitsugaya, or this Instinct design inspired by Hollow Ichigo, and my personal favorite, which is the Heart design, which was inspired by Ukiura Shifa. Do not miss out, go to Getsuga.com and wear your favorite stories. Episode 35 may have the most manga chapters adapted out of all of the episodes in Core 3, possibly even beating out last week's episode. Like I mentioned earlier, we cover everything from chapter 644 all the way up until chapter 649 with only some minimal changes. The episode is titled Don't Chase a Shadow, which is named after chapter 645, and since this episode continues immediately on from where Mayuri's fight had ended, we can deduce that the first part of Shunsui's fight will fill in the time between Pernida being eaten by Mayuri's Bankai and the Sternritter breaking out of it. The episode then shifts to the main group of the Shinigami who are trying to outrun a mysterious sniper. I really loved how some of the manga panels were adapted into this episode, and it highlights the strength of the medium of animation. Especially when Shunsui attempted to bait Lil Barrow into shooting him, the shot appears far more life-threatening and lethal than it does in the manga. This is pretty ironic since manga often tends to be more gory than their anime counterparts, but with Bleach and specifically this episode, Shunsui gets shot and it creates a gaping hole in his chest, which no doubt would have been fatal if it had in fact hit his real body. With the anime staff going to the lengths of depicting this fatal wound, it hypes up the character of Lil Barrow quite a bit, because in the past Shunsui would casually withstand Seros from Stark, but against base form Lil Barrow, literally a single shot causes a fatal wound against you. It's a great way of demonstrating just how fearsome the Sternritter are in comparison to the Espada. The manga only really delves into this aspect of Lil Barrow after he activates his holy form, so I love these changes in the anime which have made Lil Barrow appear to be more fearsome from the very beginning of the fight. The first half of their battle is quite impressive as it's a one-to-one adaptation of the manga events, but everything remains incredibly interesting as it goes to show just how well structured this fight is in the manga. The various exchanges between Lil Barrow and Shunsui are depicted very well, and none of the dialogue between the two of them is cut from the anime. And speaking of dialogue, I need to praise the voice actor of Shunsui, Akio Otsuka, who honestly I haven't been giving enough praise for, considering how amazing his work has been in Cour 3. He embodies SHUNSUI'S lovable energy so perfectly, and this episode is no exception. His energetic but yet cool delivery really bounces off of Lil Barrow's somber tone very well, and Lil Barrow's voice actor Satoshi Hino is another powerhouse in his own right, as he had also given us a very strong performance, especially after SHUNSUI switches to a more somber tone in his Bankai form and Lil Barrow becomes much more vocally expressive. In terms of fight choreography or any anime original scenes featuring new techniques, there isn't really much to talk about, since this episode is so faithful to the manga. Now, one aspect where the anime does stand out in comparison to its source material is how it had handled the Bankai transformation of SHUNSUI. There may be some people who may dislike it, but I think that the approach that they had gone for was genius. This is due to the fact that SHUNSUI'S Bankai in actuality is really a Japanese theatrical play, a tragic one to be precise. With Kubo being the general supervisor of this anime, it is safe to say that he has the final choice on a lot of the directorial choices and the aesthetic changes that they make to the anime in comparison to the manga. I think some people may not like SHUNSUI'S Bankai as it betrays their expectation, thinking that it makes the world physically darker. I don't think that this is true, because in the manga, Chad explicitly refutes Ganju's suggestion that the world is darkening. He clarifies that there is no visual change, but instead they are feeling an overwhelming chill. Orihime confirms this, explaining that while she can't see or hear anything unusual, she cannot stop shivering. Meanwhile, Ichigo is shocked by the sheer intensity of SHUNSUI'S Reiatsu. What SHUNSUI'S Bankai actually is doing is evoking powerful negative emotions, which are felt by anyone who is caught within its influence. So we can all but confirm that the physical world did not change in appearance in the manga. It's just the way that the manga had portrayed the spiritual pressure of SHUNSUI following the release of his Bankai. The anime continues to remain faithful to the manga by visually representing SHUNSUI'S Bankai as a kabuki play. This is done visually as well as in the sound design, with the inclusion of traditional Japanese sound effects which are reminiscent of kabuki performances. The reason why everybody is reacting to SHUNSUI'S Bankai release by commenting on how unsettling it is because it links back to SHUNSUI'S Bankai being a tragic play which is divided into 4 acts. This mirrors the feeling that one would get when you watch a movie or a performance and you are waiting for an inevitable tragedy to unfold. So while some people may think that SHUNSUI'S Bankai in the anime isn't accurate to the manga, I really don't agree with them, as there is a clear intention behind how it was depicted within the anime. And there's a huge difference between the two mediums. You can only do so much with a page of the manga in comparison to a video animated format where you have so many more elements like pictures in motion, sound design, and visual effects. The anime has a unique visual spin on the way that it depicts the Abyss act of SHUNSUI'S Bankai. The water itself is colored a dark green, which is an excellent representation of the depths of the two fighters which have sunken within it, while the sun could clearly be seen shining above them. I cannot stress just how ridiculously cool this visual choice was. The dark colors of the water contrasted by the strong golden rays of the sun above made this section of the fight a visual pleasure to behold. This is then followed by the stylistic change to a pure white background during the final act of SHUNSUI'S Bankai, and it was just an insane change to the tone. It shifted the atmosphere from the dark and gloomy waters to a serene white void, which spelled out the finality of SHUNSUI'S attack in a way that the medium of the manga could never do. How could I mention this episode without talking about Ohana? I loved the way that the art and direction had nailed her appearance. She was another key aspect of this episode that I was really looking forward to seeing animated, and the episode did not disappoint. Overall, episode 35 was a fantastic adaptation of the first half of SHUNSUI vs Lil Barrow, and I couldn't be more impressed by it. It fantastically adapts every major narrative beat, it loyally adapts all of the manga panels that are featured here, while all at the same time putting its own unique visual spin on the manga's content. Let's now talk about the wonderful staff who had made this episode the masterpiece that it was. This episode featured the directorial return of the incredibly talented Emma Saito, and if you don't know who she is, she was the director for episode 6, which still stands above almost every other episode of the anime as the most well-produced episode. She wasn't alone in her directorial role though, as she had Taguchi, Murata, and Shintaro help her out as co-directors. Now, in addition to directing, she also also storyboarded the episode, which would explain why this episode features some of the most visually creative shots that I've ever seen in the entire series. The episode is full of scenes which are wallpaper worthy and layouts which really allow this episode to shine in a manner like we've never seen before. One of my personal favorite shots was the first person perspective frame which we got when Shunsui was pointing his finger at Lil. It was an amazing shot which was only rivaled by my second favorite, which is the entire building Zangarin sequence, which was depicted via this majestic scene which had very gorgeous layouts. I really hope that we get to see more of Emma Saito, if not in Cour 3 then most definitely in Cour 4, because despite her being fairly new to the scene, I believe that she has the potential to be an industry name if she continues to improve, and I'd love nothing more than to see her spread her wings on Bleach. On the key animator side of things, we had a few stars in today's episode. We had Naruto legend Tatsuya Koyanagi and a really talented Boruto animator by the name of Katsuhiro Takagi. Now we have actually seen Takagi do some work during Cour 2. Episode 35 also featured the highest number of freelance animators that we've seen on any episode of Cour 3. We had the likes of the rising star Amphibi, the skillful Likri, and surprisingly AV.Ter, a really talented animator. This episode was fantastic due to all of the hard work of these talented people, so I'm grateful to every single one of them. So that's my initial thoughts on Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 35. This was another intense episode. So much happened here as we have just under 5 chapters of content adapted into this single episode. Seeing Shunsui's highly anticipated Bankai reveal was easily my highlight for this episode. I love how the Bankai was depicted, with the 4 acts of his Bankai being faithfully adapted from the manga, with the anime giving them their own visual twist, and it was amazing seeing Shunsui's Zanpakuto spirit Katen appear towards the end of the episode. Also, the brief interactions between Nanao and the Shinigami, as well as Ichigo and Askin, helped to add some downtime from the action-heavy segments featuring Shunsui and Lil. This episode retains all of Shunsui's dialogue and charm from the manga, as he really was at the end of the rope here, left with no choice but to activate his Bankai. If it wasn't already obvious, I'm really happy with this week's episode, and now I want to know what all of you thought about episode 35. Did you enjoy the first half of Shunsui vs Lil? Were you happy with how Lil's divine judgment form had looked here? And what are your thoughts about Shunsui's incredible Bankai reveal? Next week's episode is titled Baby Hold Your Hand 2, which means that we are cutting back to Mayuri vs Pernida for the second half of that fight. We still have 5 episodes of Cour 3 left, and I am certain that once Mayuri and Shunsui's fights are done, we are going to be getting one big fight for the end of the Cour, which is going to be expanded upon with some anime original material. We do have a couple more weeks until that happens, so for now continue the discussion in the comments. Let me know what you loved about this week's installment of Bleach, and lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow for my manga versus anime comparison of this week's episode.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more.
Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.